Story 1. The Whispering Hollow. I was never one for ghost stories. Growing up in the shadow of the Appalachian Mountains, I'd heard plenty, tales of haints, lost miners, and things that skittered in the dark. My grandpa used to sit on the porch of our old cabin in Harlan County, Kentucky, whittling sticks into nothing, warning me to steer clear of certain hollers after dusk. Some places, he'd say, his eyes glinting like the edge of his knife, ain't meant for the living. I'd laugh it off, chalking it up to old-timer talk. But that was before I wandered into Blackthorn Hollow, before I heard the whispers. My name's Caleb, and in the summer of 2017, I was 24, fresh out of college and back home in Harlan to figure out my next move. I'd studied geology, fascinated by the ancient bones of the mountains, the way they held secrets in their strata. I'd spent my childhood exploring the ridges and creeks around our family's land, so when I heard about an old coal mine in Blackthorn Hollow, abandoned since the 1940s, I figured it'd be a good spot to poke around. Maybe I'd find some interesting rock samples or relics from the mining days. The hollow was only a few miles from our cabin, tucked deep in a crease of the mountains where the trees grew thick and the air felt heavier. Locals avoided it, said it was cursed, but I wasn't one to buy into superstition. Not yet. It was late June, the kind of day where the heat clings to your skin like damp cotton. I packed a flashlight, a notebook, and a water bottle and headed out at dawn, figuring I'd beat the worst of the humidity. The trail to Blackthorn was overgrown, barely a path at all, with briars snagging at my jeans. The deeper I went, the quieter it got. No birds, no wind, just the crunch of my boots on pine needles. By noon, I found the mine entrance, a jagged maw in the hillside, half collapsed, with rusted iron tracks disappearing into the dark. The air around it smelled wrong, like wet earth, and something sharp, like ozone after a storm. I should have turned back then. Something in my gut told me to. But curiosity's a cruel master. I flicked on my flashlight and stepped inside. The tunnel was narrow, the walls slick with moisture and streaked with coal dust. The beam of my light barely cut through the gloom, and every few steps, I'd hear a faint drip of water echoing somewhere deeper in. I told myself I'd only go a little ways, just enough to see what was left of the old operation. That's when I heard it, a whisper, so soft I thought I'd imagined it. It was like a breath against my ear, saying something I couldn't quite catch. I froze, my heart thumping loud enough to drown out the sound. "Hello," I called, my voice bouncing off the walls. Nothing answered, just silence, thick and heavy. I pressed on, telling myself it was just the wind or my mind playing tricks. The tunnel sloped downward and the air grew colder, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones. My flashlight flickered, and for a moment I thought it'd die. I shook it, cursing under my breath, and the beam steadied. That's when I saw the first mark on the wall, a crude carving, like a stick figure with two long limbs and no face. It looked old, worn smooth by time, but it sent a shiver down my spine. I'd seen similar carvings in books about ancient Appalachian folklore, symbols tied to something folks called the Old Ones. Superstition, I told myself again, just miners messing around, but the whispers came back, louder this time, overlapping like a crowd murmuring just out of sight. Words I couldn't make out, but they felt urgent, angry. I spun around, shining my light back the way I came. The tunnel was empty, but the shadows seemed to shift, like they were watching me. My mouth went dry and I started to backtrack, my boots slipping on the damp stone. The whispers followed, growing sharper, more distinct. "Stay," they seemed to say. "See." I don't know why I didn't run. Maybe it was fear locking my legs, or maybe it was something else, something pulling me deeper. I kept going, my flashlight catching more carvings on the walls, dozens of them now, all faceless, all wrong. The tunnel opened into a wider chamber, and that's when I saw it, a pile of bones in the center of the room. They weren't animal bones, too big, too human. Skulls, femurs, ribcage, scattered like someone had tried to arrange them and given up. My stomach churned and I gagged, the smell of decay hitting me like a punch. The whispers were everywhere now, a cacophony of voices, some pleading, some laughing, all pressing against my skull. I stumbled back, my flashlight dropping to the ground. The beam spun, casting wild shadows, and for a split second I saw something move, a shape, tall and thin with limbs that bent wrong like the carvings. It was there and gone, melting into the dark. I grabbed my light and ran, my breath ragged, the whispers chasing me up the tunnel. I didn't look back. I couldn't. When I finally burst out into the daylight, I collapsed, gasping, my hands shaking so bad I could barely hold my water bottle. The forest was silent again, but I felt watched, like the hollow itself was staring at me. I made it home, locked the door, and didn't sleep for 2 days. I kept hearing those whispers, faint but persistent, like they'd followed me out. I went back to the library in town, digging through old records. Blackthorn Hollow had been a mining camp in the 1930s, but it shut down after a collapse killed 12 men. The official report said it was an accident, but there were rumors, stories of miners hearing voices, seeing things in the tunnels. Some claimed the mountain was angry, that they'd dug too deep and woken something up. The locals stopped talking about it after a while, like saying its name would call it back. I never went back to Blackthorn. I moved away from Harlan a year later, but I still dream about that chamber, those bones, that thing in the dark. Sometimes when it's quiet, I hear the whispers again, faint but clear, calling my name. I don't know what I saw down there, but I know it saw me, and I know it's still waiting. Story 2, The Woman in the Mist. I've always been a night owl, the kind of person who feels more alive when the world's asleep. Back in 2019, I was 29, working as a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains, Tennessee side. My name's Ellie, and I'd grown up in Gatlinburg, close enough to the mountains to know their beauty and their secrets. The Smokies are a place of contradictions, stunning vistas that draw tourists by the thousands, and dark, quiet corners where the air feels like it's holding its breath. I loved my job, patrolling trails, checking campsites, making sure folks didn't get lost or mess with the wildlife. But one night on a routine patrol near Clingman's Dome, I met something that wasn't human, and it's haunted me ever since. It was mid-October, the air crisp with that autumn bite, the leaves a riot of red and gold. I was on the late shift, driving my ranger truck along a service road that looped around the dome. The tourists were gone for the day, and the park was quiet, save for the occasional owl hoot or rustle of deer in the underbrush. My radio crackled with static, but no calls came through. Cell service is spotty up there, and the radios aren't much better. I liked the solitude, though. It gave me time to think, to breathe. That night, though, the quiet felt different, heavier, like the mountains were watching me. Around 1 a.m., I noticed a fog rolling in, thick and fast, blanketing the road in a gray haze. It wasn't unusual for the Smokies, hence the name, but this fog was strange, almost alive, curling like fingers around the trees. My headlights barely cut through it, and I slowed to a crawl, not wanting to hit a deer or slide off the road. That's when I saw her. A figure, standing just off the shoulder, half hidden in the mist. She was tall, her silhouette sharp against the fog, wearing what looked like a long dress or cloak. I figured she was a hiker, maybe lost, maybe hurt. My heart kicked up a notch, and I pulled over, grabbing my flashlight. "Hey," I called, stepping out of the truck. "You okay? You need help?" The figure didn't move, just stood there, head slightly tilted, like she was listening. I approached, my boots crunching on gravel, the beam of my flashlight shaking a little in my hand. The air felt wrong, colder than it should have been, and there was a smell, something sweet, like rotting flowers. As I got closer, I saw her more clearly. She was pale, her skin almost translucent, her hair long and dark, hanging in wet strands over her face. Her dress was old-fashioned, like something from 100 years ago, tattered at the edges. I stopped a few feet away, my breath catching. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" She turned then, slow and deliberate, and I swear my blood froze. Her face, God, her face. It was beautiful but wrong, like a porcelain doll left out in the rain. Her eyes were too big, too dark, like pits that swallowed the light. She smiled, but it wasn't a smile you'd want to see. It was hungry. "Lost," she said, her voice low, like it came from somewhere deep underground. "So lost." I took a step back, my hand instinctively going to the radio on my belt, but it was dead, just static. "I can help you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "What's your name? Where are you headed?" She didn't answer, just took a step toward me, her bare feet silent on the gravel. That's when I noticed she wasn't leaving footprints. The ground was damp from the fog, but there was nothing where she stepped. My stomach twisted and I gripped my flashlight tighter, like it could protect me. "You're kind," she said, her voice softer now, almost a purr. "Kind ones always come." She reached out, her fingers long and thin, like the branches of a dead tree. I stumbled back, my heart pounding so hard I thought it'd burst. The fog seemed to thicken around her, wrapping her like a shroud, and for a moment I thought I saw other shapes in the mist, faint, human-like, but twisted, like they were caught in some invisible web. I didn't wait to see more. I turned and ran for the truck, my boots slipping on the slick road. I don't know how I made it back inside, but I slammed the door and locked it, my hands shaking so bad I could barely turn the key. The fog was everywhere now, pressing against the windows, and I swear I saw her face right outside, those black eyes staring through the glass. I gunned the engine and peeled out, the truck fishtailing as I sped down the mountain. The fog followed, curling after me like it had a mind of its own. I didn't stop until I hit the ranger station, nearly crashing into the gate. I told my supervisor what happened, leaving out the parts that sounded crazy. He said it was probably just a lost hiker, maybe a prankster, but I could tell he didn't believe it himself. He'd grown up in these mountains too, heard the same stories I had, about the woman in the mist, a spirit who lures people into the fog and takes them somewhere else, somewhere you don't come back from. Old-timers said she was a settler's wife, abandoned by her husband in the 1800s, left to wander the mountains until she became something else, something that hunts. I quit the ranger job a month later. Couldn't handle the night shifts anymore, couldn't stand the way the fog looked when it rolled in. I moved to Knoxville, got a desk job, tried to forget. But sometimes when I'm driving at night and the mist starts to gather, I see her in my rearview mirror, standing just off the road, smiling that awful smile. I don't stop. I don't look back, but I know she's still out there, waiting for the next kind one to come along. Story 3. The shadow in the barn. I've never been one to scare easy. Growing up on a farm in Boone, North Carolina, you get used to the dark, the way the mountains loom like silent giants under the stars. My name's Lucas, and in the fall of 2020, I was 32, running the family farm after my dad passed. It was just me, my wife Sarah, and our 2 dogs, living in a century-old farmhouse surrounded by fields and a rickety barn that had seen better days. I'd heard the stories about our land, whispers of strange lights, voices in the wind, but I figured they were just tales to spook kids. That was before I saw the thing in the barn, before it saw me. It started in late September, when the nights got longer and the air turned sharp. Sarah and I had been fixing up the farmhouse, trying to make it our own, but money was tight and the barn was last on the list. It was a hulking thing, weathered gray, with gaps in the planks big enough to let the wind howl through. I'd go in there sometimes to check on tools or feed for the chickens, but I never lingered. Something about it always felt off, like the air was too still, too heavy. The dogs wouldn't go near it either. They'd whine and tug back on their leashes if I got too close. One evening, just after sunset, I noticed the barn door was ajar. I'd locked it that morning, made a point of it after some kids from town had been sneaking around, stealing scrap metal. The padlock was still there, but it was unlatched, hanging loose like someone had picked it. I grabbed my flashlight and a crowbar, figuring I'd scare off any trespassers. Sarah was in the kitchen, humming as she cooked dinner, and I didn't want to worry her, so I told her I was just checking on things. The dogs stayed on the porch, their ears flat, watching me go. The air was cool as I crossed the yard, the grass crunching under my boots. The barn loomed ahead, its silhouette black against the twilight. I pushed the door open, the hinges screaming, and shone my flashlight inside. The beam cut through the dark, catching dust motes and stacks of hay bales. Everything looked normal, tools on the workbench, feed bags lined up against the wall. But the smell hit me like a slap, something sour like spoiled milk mixed with wet earth. I called out, "Anyone in here?" My voice echoed, but no one answered, just the creak of the barn settling. I stepped inside, my boots thudding on the wooden floor. That's when I heard it, a low, scraping sound like something heavy being dragged across the loft above. I froze, my heart kicking up, and aimed the flashlight at the ladder leading to the hayloft. The beam shook in my hand. "Come out now, or I'm calling the cops," I shouted, gripping the crowbar tighter. The scraping stopped, replaced by a silence so thick it felt like it was pressing on my chest. Then a whisper, not words, just a breathy hiss, like air leaking from a tire. It came from everywhere and nowhere, circling me. I should have left then. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I'd never backed down from a fight, and I wasn't about to start. I climbed the ladder, the rungs creaking under my weight. The loft was a mess of old hay and broken crates, the air thick with dust. My flashlight swept the shadows, and for a moment I thought I was alone. Then I saw it, a shape, crouched in the far corner where the roof slanted low. It was tall, too tall to be human, its limbs bent at angles that made my stomach lurch. Its head was wrong, too featureless, like a smudge of darkness. It didn't move, but I felt it watching me, its presence like a weight on my soul. I stumbled back, nearly falling off the ladder. The thing didn't follow, but that hiss came again, louder, sharper, like it was laughing. I scrambled down, my hands slipping on the rungs, and hit the ground running. The barn door slammed shut behind me as I sprinted for the house, the dogs barking like mad. Sarah met me at the door, her face pale. "What happened? You're white as a sheet." I couldn't talk, just locked the door and checked every window, my hands shaking so bad I dropped the crowbar. The next day I went back to the barn in daylight, armed with a shotgun. The door was locked, the padlock secure, like nothing had happened. Inside, everything was in place, no sign of anything disturbed. But in the loft, I found something that made my blood run cold. A patch of hay was flattened, like something heavy had been sitting there, and in the dust was a single mark, a long, thin scratch, like a claw had dragged across the wood. I burned the hay that night, told Sarah it was just to clear space, but she knew I was lying. She'd heard the stories too from her grandma about the shadow man, a thing that lived in old barns and cellars, feeding on fear, waiting for someone to notice it. We sold the farm a year later. Couldn't stay after that. The new owners asked about the barn, said they'd heard it was haunted. I told them to tear it down. They laughed, thought I was joking. I wasn't. I still see that thing in my dreams, crouched in the dark, watching me. Sometimes when I'm alone at night, I hear that hiss, faint but clear, like it's found me again. I don't know what it was, but I know it's still out there, waiting for someone else to open the wrong door. Story 4. The Bell Witch's Echo. I've always been a skeptic, the kind of person who needs to see something to believe it. My name's Hannah, and in the winter of 2021, I was 27, working as a freelance photographer based out of Bristol, Tennessee. I'd grown up hearing about the Bell Witch, a legend from Adams, just across the state line, where a spirit supposedly tormented a family back in the 1810s. It was the kind of story that drew tourists and ghost hunters, but I always thought it was just a tall tale, puffed up to sell books. That changed when I took a job to shoot photos at an old farmstead near the Bell family's original land. What I found there wasn't just a story. It was real, and it followed me home. The job came through a local historical society. They wanted photos of a crumbling farmhouse, said to be a distant cousin's property tied to the Bell family, for a preservation project. The place was off a dirt road, deep in the hills, surrounded by gnarled oaks and fields gone to seed. I arrived on a gray December morning, the sky heavy with the promise of snow. The farmhouse was a wreck, sagging roof, broken windows, the kind of place that looked like it was rotting from the inside out. I set up my camera, figuring I'd get some moody shots of the decay, maybe catch the eerie vibe the society was hoping for. The air was bitter cold and my breath fogged as I worked. The property felt too quiet, like the world was holding its breath. No birds, no wind, just the creak of the house settling. I started outside, snapping photos of the peeling paint and the overgrown yard, but something kept drawing my eye to the attic window. It was intact, unlike the others, and every time I looked up, I swore I saw a flicker of movement, like a curtain twitching. I chalked it up to my imagination. Old houses play tricks on you, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger the longer I stayed. Inside, the house was worse. The floorboards groaned under my weight, and the air smelled of mildew and something sharper, like burnt hair. I moved carefully, photographing the sagging staircase, the fireplace choked with ash, the faded wallpaper curling like dead skin. That's when I heard it, a faint, rhythmic tapping like someone rapping their knuckles on wood. It came from upstairs, steady and deliberate. I froze, my camera dangling from its strap. "Hello," I called, my voice thin in the empty house. The tapping stopped, and for a moment I thought I'd imagined it. Then it started again, faster, like it was answering me. I should have left. Every fiber of my being screamed to get out, but I've always been stubborn, and I wasn't about to let some creaky old house scare me off a paying gig. I climbed the stairs, each step creaking louder than the last, my flashlight beam shaking in my hand. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, coming from the attic. The door at the top of the stairs was ajar, and when I pushed it open, the air hit me like a slap, cold, thick, and wrong. The attic was small, cluttered with broken furniture and dusty trunks, but in the center, under that one intact window, was a single object, an old brass bell, tarnished green, sitting on the floor like it had been placed there on purpose. I don't know why I picked it up. It was like my hands moved on their own, drawn to the weight of it. The moment I touched it, the tapping stopped, replaced by a low, guttural laugh that seemed to come from the walls themselves. My heart slammed against my ribs and I dropped the bell. It hit the floor with a dull clang and the room went dark, not just my flashlight, but the light from the window, like someone had pulled a curtain over the sun. I stumbled back, my hands fumbling for the door, and that's when I saw her. She was standing in the corner, barely more than a shadow at first, but as my eyes adjusted, I saw her clearly. A woman, or something like one, her body hunched, her face obscured by matted hair. Her dress was ragged, stained with something dark, and her hands twitched like they were clawing at the air. She didn't move, but I felt her eyes on me, boring into my skull. "You rang," she whispered, her voice like gravel scraping together. I screamed, or I think I did, and bolted for the stairs, tripping over my own feet. The laugh followed me, echoing louder, joined by other voices, all whispering my name. I don't remember how I got out of the house. One minute I was in the attic, the next I was in my car, speeding down the dirt road, my camera left behind. When I got home to Bristol, I locked every door and window, my hands shaking so bad I couldn't hold a glass of water. That night I heard the tapping again, faint but unmistakable, coming from my apartment walls. I didn't sleep. The next day I called the Historical Society, told them I'd lost the photos and refused to go back. They didn't push like they knew something I didn't. I did some digging after that, desperate to understand what I'd seen. The Bell Witch, according to legend, wasn't just a ghost. She was a force, something old and angry, tied to the land itself. Locals said she never really left, that she lingered in the hills, drawn to certain places, certain objects, like a bell. I found an old journal entry from a Bell descendant, buried in an archive, mentioning a brass bell that called her forth when rung. They'd tried to destroy it, but it kept turning up like it wanted to be found. I moved to Nashville a few months later, hoping distance would help. It didn't. The tapping follows me, faint but always there, especially at night. Sometimes I dream of that attic, of her standing in the corner, her hands reaching for me. I don't know if I called her or if she was already there, waiting. But I know one thing. If you ever find an old bell in a place it shouldn't be, don't touch it, don't ring it, because she's listening. Story 5. The Hollow's Hunger. I've never been one to believe in monsters, not the kind with claws and teeth anyway. My name's Nate, and in the spring of 2022, I was 30, a mechanic living in a small trailer just outside Pikeville, Kentucky. I'd grown up in these hills, fishing in the creeks and hunting in the woods, knowing every trail like the back of my hand. The Appalachians were home, but they had their secrets, places you didn't go, stories you didn't repeat. My uncle used to talk about a place called Deadman's Hollow, a sunken patch of forest where the ground was always wet and the trees grew crooked. He said it was hungry, that it took people who wandered too close. I thought he was full of it, until I went looking for my brother. Tommy was 25, a wild kid who loved trouble as much as I loved fixing engines. He'd been running with a rough crowd, drinking too much, picking fights. One night in April, he didn't come home. His girlfriend, Leela, said he'd been talking about Deadman's Hollow, how some buddies dared him to camp there overnight for $100. I figured he was passed out drunk somewhere, but when he didn't show up by morning, I got worried. Leela begged me to go look for him, her eyes red from crying. I grabbed my hunting rifle, a flashlight, and a thermos of coffee and headed out. I knew the Hollow's reputation, but I wasn't about to let my little brother rot out there over a stupid bet. The trail to Deadman's Hollow was a faint path through the pines, barely used, overgrown with kudzu and thorns. It was late afternoon when I started, the sun low and golden, casting long shadows that seemed to twist in the corner of my eye. The air got colder the deeper I went, and the forest was quiet. No birds, no squirrels, just the crunch of my boots and the thud of my heart. I called Tommy's name every few minutes, my voice swallowed by the trees. By the time I reached the hollow, the sun was dipping below the ridge, and the place lived up to its name. It was a bowl-shaped dip in the earth, ringed by gnarled oaks and carpeted with moss so thick it looked like it could swallow you whole. The ground squelched under my feet like it was alive, and the air smelled wrong, like rot and iron. I found Tommy's campsite near the center, a cheap tent half-collapsed, a fire pit with cold ashes, and a bottle of whiskey tipped over in the dirt. His backpack was there, but no sign of him. "Tommy," I shouted, my voice echoing back, distorted like someone else was calling. That's when I noticed the tracks. They weren't human. Too big, too deep, with claw marks that dug into the earth like knives. They led away from the tent, toward a cluster of rocks that formed a natural arch, like a doorway into the ground. My stomach twisted, but I followed them, my rifle heavy in my hands. Under the arch, the air was colder, wetter, like stepping into a cave. My flashlight caught glints of something slick on the rocks, slime or maybe blood. The track stopped at a narrow crevice, barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through. I called for Tommy again, and this time I heard something, a low moan, faint but unmistakable, coming from inside. My heart leapt, thinking it was him, hurt maybe, but alive. I wedged myself into the crevice, the walls pressing against my shoulders, my breath shallow. The moan came again, louder, but it wasn't Tommy's voice. It was deeper, guttural, like something imitating a human sound. The crevice opened into a small chamber, the walls glistening with that same slickness. My flashlight beam shook as I swept it around, and then I saw it. Something crouched in the dark, its back to me. It was big, bigger than any man, its skin gray and mottled like it was made of the earth itself. It was hunched over something, and I heard a wet, tearing sound like meat being ripped apart. My stomach churned and I gagged, the smell hitting me, rotting flesh, thick and cloying. The thing turned slow, its head swiveling without moving its body. Its face was a nightmare. No eyes, just hollow sockets and a mouth too wide, filled with jagged teeth that gleamed in the light. I don't know if I screamed. I raised my rifle, my hands shaking so bad I could barely aim, and fired. The shot echoed, deafening in the tight space, and the thing let out a sound like 1,000 voices howling at once. It lunged, faster than anything that size should move, and I scrambled back, scraping my arms raw on the rocks. I don't know how I got out, but I did, running through the hollow, branches tearing at my face, the thing's howls chasing me. I didn't stop until I reached my truck, my lungs burning, my rifle gone, dropped somewhere in the dark. I went to the sheriff, told him Tommy was missing, but I didn't tell him about the thing. He'd think I was crazy. They searched the hollow, found the tent, the whiskey, but no Tommy. No tracks either, like the ground had swallowed them. The official report said he'd wandered off, maybe fallen into a ravine. But I know better. I went back once in daylight with a preacher from town. The crevice was gone, like the rocks had shifted to hide it. The preacher prayed, said the hollow was cursed, that it took what it wanted and gave nothing back. I don't sleep much anymore. Leela moved away, couldn't stand the guilt. I stayed, but I don't go near the woods. Sometimes at night, I hear that moan, low and hungry, coming from the hills. I keep a loaded shotgun by my bed, but I know it won't help. Whatever's in Deadman's Hollow, it's still there and it's still hungry. For Tommy, for me, for anyone who steps into its jaws. Story 6, The Lantern's Call. I've always been drawn to the quiet of the night. There's something about the way the world hushes under a blanket of stars that makes you feel like you're the only one left. My name's Clara, and in the summer of 2023, I was 34, a librarian living in a small town called Grayson, nestled in the heart of West Virginia's Appalachian foothills. I'd moved there after a messy divorce, craving the simplicity of a place where the mountains stood watch and the past felt closer than the present. I'd heard the local legends, tales of lost travelers and lights in the woods, but I never paid them much mind, until I followed the lantern. It was early July, the air thick with humidity and the drone of cicadas. I'd taken to evening walks along the old logging trails near my rental house, a way to clear my head after long days shelving books and helping kids with their summer reading. One trail, known as Cutler's Path, wound deep into the forest, past a crumbling stone wall said to mark an old settler's claim. Locals avoided it, claiming it was bad luck, but I liked the solitude, the way the pines swallowed the world. That night I stayed out later than usual, the sky bruising purple as dusk settled. I was about a mile in when I saw it, a faint, golden glow bobbing through the trees, like someone carrying a lantern. At first, I thought it was another hiker, maybe a camper who'd gotten turned around. I called out, "Hey, you lost." The light stopped, hovering maybe 100 yards ahead, then flickered, like it was beckoning. My curiosity got the better of me, stupid I know, but I'd always been the type to chase answers. I followed, my sneakers crunching on pine needles, the air growing cooler as the trail dipped into a ravine. The light kept moving, always just out of reach, leading me deeper than I'd ever gone before. The forest felt different here, the trees leaning in, their branches tangled like they were trying to block out the sky. I don't know how long I followed that light, minutes, maybe an hour. Time felt slippery, like I was caught in a dream. The trail ended at a clearing I'd never seen. ringed by stones that looked too perfectly placed to be natural. In the center was an old well, its wooden cover rotted and sagging, the kind of thing you'd see in a ghost story. The lantern light was gone, but now there was a sound, a low, rhythmic creak like a rope swaying. I stepped closer, my flashlight beam trembling as it hit the well. Something was moving inside, a shadow shifting just below the rim. I should have run. Every nerve in my body screamed it, but my legs wouldn't move. I leaned over the well, my flashlight catching glints of something wet and dark, like the walls were coated in oil. The creaking grew louder, and then I heard a voice, not from the well but behind me, soft and lilting like a child singing. "Come see," it said. I spun around, my heart slamming against my ribs, but there was nothing, just the empty clearing, the stones, the trees. When I turned back to the well, the shadow was closer, climbing the walls, its shape vaguely human but stretched, like it had been pulled too thin. I stumbled back, tripping over one of the stones, and that's when I saw her. She was standing at the edge of the clearing, a woman in a faded dress, her face pale and sharp, her eyes glowing like the lantern I'd followed. She held a real lantern now, its flame steady despite the breeze, and she was smiling, not a kind smile, but one that made my skin crawl like she knew something I didn't. "You came," she said, her voice echoing inside my skull. "They always come." I don't know how I found the strength to move, but I did, scrambling to my feet and running back the way I came. The forest seemed to fight me, branches snagging my clothes, roots tripping my feet. The singing followed, that same childlike voice joined by others, a chorus weaving through the trees. I didn't look back, but I felt her behind me, the weight of her gaze like a hand on my neck. The lantern's light flickered in my peripheral vision, always just out of sight, guiding me deeper into the dark before I realized I was lost. I don't know how I made it out. Dawn was breaking when I stumbled onto a gravel road, miles from where I'd started. My clothes were torn, my arms scratched bloody, my flashlight gone. A trucker found me, said I looked like I'd seen a ghost. I didn't tell him what I saw. I couldn't. When I got home, I locked the door and didn't leave for days, jumping at every creak of the house. I tried to research Cutler's path, digging through old records at the library. I found a mention of a settler's daughter, Abigail Cutler, who'd vanished in those woods in the 1850s. They said she'd been looking for her father, who'd gone missing near a well. Locals claimed her spirit still wandered, carrying a lantern, leading people to the same fate. I moved back to Charleston a month later. I couldn't stay in Grayson, couldn't walk those trails again. But the singing follows me. At night, when the house is quiet, I hear it, faint, like it's coming from far away, but always the same tune, the same words. "Come see." I keep the lights on now every night, afraid of what I'll see in the dark. I don't know what she wanted or why she chose me. But I know she's still out there, her lantern glowing, waiting for the next fool to follow. Story 7. The Forgotten Choir. I've always been a bit of a loner, content with my own company and the quiet of the world after midnight. My name's Jonah, and in the fall of 2024, I was 28, working as a night janitor at a community college in Blowing Rock, North Carolina. The campus was small, tucked into the Blue Ridge Mountains, with old brick buildings that creaked like they were whispering secrets. I liked the job. Nobody bothered me, and I could listen to my music while I mopped floors. But there was one building, the old chapel, that always gave me the creeps. People said it was haunted, tied to some old tragedy nobody liked to talk about. I laughed it off, until I heard the choir. The chapel was a relic, built in the 1890s, with stained glass windows and pews worn smooth by time. It wasn't used much anymore, just for storage and the occasional ceremony, but it was part of my cleaning route. I'd go in around 2 a.m., mop the floors, dust the pews, and get out quick. The place had a way of making you feel small, like the shadows were heavier than they should be. The air always smelled faintly of wax and something sour, like old hymnals left to rot. I'd heard the stories, students claiming they heard singing at night or saw figures in the windows, but I figured it was just kids messing around. That changed one night in October. It was a cold, clear night, the kind where the stars look sharp enough to cut. I was behind schedule, so I didn't get to the chapel until nearly 3 a.m. The door was heavy, oak carved with crosses, and it groaned when I pushed it open. Inside, the air was colder than outside, like stepping into a freezer. My breath fogged and my flashlight beam barely touched the dark, the stained glass windows swallowing the light. I started mopping, my earbuds in, but the music kept cutting out, replaced by static. I pulled them out, annoyed, and that's when I heard it, a faint hum, like voices singing far away. I froze, my mop dripping onto the floor. The sound was soft, almost beautiful, like a hymn you'd hear in church, but it was wrong, too slow, the notes sliding into each other like they were melting. It was coming from the choir loft, a narrow platform above the altar, hidden in shadow. I called out, "Who's up there?" My voice echoed, but the singing didn't stop. It got louder, more voices joining in, a chorus that felt like it was pressing against my skin. I should have left, but I've always been too stubborn for my own good. I climbed the narrow stairs to the loft, my flashlight shaking in my hand. The loft was empty, just dust and a few broken hymnals scattered on the floor. But the singing was deafening now, a wall of sound that made my head throb. It wasn't English, some language I didn't know, all sharp consonants and drawn-out vowels. I swept my flashlight around, and that's when I saw the scratches on the walls, deep and jagged, like someone had clawed at the wood. They formed shapes, circles, spirals, things that hurt to look at too long. The air grew heavier, like it was trying to choke me, and the singing turned into a wail, sharp and desperate, like a warning. I stumbled back, nearly falling down the stairs, and that's when I saw them. Figures, maybe a dozen, standing in the pews below. They were faint, like shadows cast by candlelight, but I could make out their shapes, men and women, dressed in old clothes, their heads bowed like they were praying. Their mouths were moving, but the sound wasn't coming from them. It was coming from everywhere, vibrating through the floor, the walls, my bones. One of them looked up, and I swear its face was blank, just smooth skin where eyes and a mouth should have been. I screamed, dropping my flashlight, and ran for the door. The singing followed me, growing louder, angrier, like it was trying to pull me back. I fumbled with the door, my hands slick with sweat, and when I finally got it open, the cold night air hit me like a slap. I didn't stop running until I reached the maintenance shed, locking myself inside until dawn. When I went back for my stuff, the chapel was quiet, the scratches on the walls gone, like they'd never been there. But I found something under one of the pews, a piece of paper, yellowed and brittle, with words in that same strange language, written in ink that looked too fresh. I quit the next day. Didn't tell my boss why, just said I couldn't do nights anymore. I went to the library, digging through old records, and found a story buried in a local history book. In 1903, a choir of 12 had vanished from that chapel during a revival meeting. No bodies, no trace, just their hymnals left behind. The town blamed a cult, some group that worshipped something older than the mountains, but nobody ever proved it. The chapel was locked up for years after, until the college bought the land. I moved to Raleigh a few weeks later, got a day job at a warehouse. I don't listen to music at night anymore, don't trust the quiet. Sometimes when I'm alone, I hear that humming, faint and far away, like it's waiting for me to sing along. I keep the lights on, keep the radio playing, anything to drown it out. But I know they're still there in that chapel, singing to something that listens back. Story 8. The Bone Orchard. I've never been afraid of the dark. Growing up in the backwoods of Virginia, you learn to navigate by starlight, to trust the crunch of leaves underfoot. My name's Tessa, and in the winter of 2024, I was 31, a botanist studying rare plants in the Shenandoah Valley. I'd spent years combing the Appalachians for endangered species, cataloging ferns and wildflowers in places most folks wouldn't dare tread. The mountains were my sanctuary until I stumbled into a place called the Bone Orchard. That's when I learned some things in these hills don't want to be found. It was late November, the air sharp with frost, the trees bare and skeletal against the gray sky. I'd been hired by a conservation group to survey a remote stretch of forest near 𝒉𝒄𝒄𝒄, a place locals call the orchard, not for fruit trees, but for the way the pines grew in neat rows, like they'd been planted by something with intent. The area was off-limits, technically, owned by a private trust that didn't take kindly to trespassers, but my contact had pulled strings for access. They'd warned me about the rumors, disappearances, strange lights, bones found where no bones should be, but I brushed it off. I was there for plants, not ghost stories. I set out at dawn, my backpack loaded with sample kits, a GPS and a thermos of tea. The trail was faint, overgrown with brambles, and the deeper I went, the quieter it got. No birds, no wind, just the sound of my boots on frozen ground. By noon, I reached the orchard. It was eerie rows of pines perfectly spaced, their trunks unnaturally straight, like they'd been carved rather than grown. The ground was covered in a thick layer of needles, muffling my steps, and the air smelled of sap and something metallic, like blood. I started taking samples, noting the lack of undergrowth, the way the soil seemed too loose, too soft. That's when I found the first bone. It was half buried under a pine, a human femur, bleached white and polished smooth. I froze, my heart pounding, thinking it was a deer or a bear at first. But the shape was unmistakable. I dug a little, careful not to disturb it, and found more: ribs, a skull, fragments of fingers, all arranged in a circle like a ritual. My hands shook as I took photos, telling myself it was an old burial, maybe Native American, though something about it felt wrong. The bones were too clean, too recent. I should have left then, but I'm stubborn and I'd come too far to turn back empty-handed. I kept working, moving to the next row when I heard it, a low, rhythmic thumping like a heartbeat in the earth. It came from deeper in the orchard, steady and deliberate, vibrating through my boots. I followed it, my curiosity overriding my fear, until I reached a clearing. In the center was a tree unlike the others, massive, twisted, its bark black and glistening, like it was sweating oil. The thumping was louder here, coming from the ground beneath it, and the air was thick, hard to breathe, like it was pushing me away. I circled the tree, my flashlight catching strange markings carved into the bark, symbols I didn't recognize, all curves and angles, like they were meant to hold something in, or keep something out. That's when I saw the roots, thick, gnarled, and moving, not like a plant swaying in the wind, but like fingers curling, reaching. They were wrapped around more bones, dozens of them, woven into the earth like a grotesque tapestry. Skulls stared up at me, their sockets empty but watching, and I swear I heard a whisper, not from the tree but from inside my head. "Stay, feed." I stumbled back, my breath coming in gasps, and tripped over something soft. It was a shoe, a modern hiking boot, laces still tied, caked in dirt. My stomach lurched when I saw the blood, still wet, pooling around it. The thumping grew louder, faster, and the roots began to shift, slithering toward me, slow but deliberate. I ran, my backpack bouncing, branches tearing at my face. The forest seemed to close in, the pines leaning closer, their needles sharp as claws. The whispers followed, a chorus now, chanting words I couldn't understand but felt in my bones. I don't know how I made it out. I ran until my lungs burned, until I hit a logging road and flagged down a ranger's truck. I told him about the bones, the tree, but I didn't mention the whispers or the roots. He didn't believe me, said it was probably an old cemetery, but I saw the way his hands tightened on the wheel. They searched the orchard the next day, found nothing. No bones, no tree, just rows of pines and soft earth. My photos were gone, my camera corrupted, like something had wiped it clean. I quit the conservation job, moved to Richmond, took a desk job cataloging data. I don't go into the woods anymore, don't trust the quiet. At night, I hear that thumping, faint but persistent, like a heartbeat under the floor. Sometimes I dream of the orchard, of roots wrapping around my legs, pulling me down into the earth. I wake up screaming, my hands clawing at the sheets. The mountains keep their secrets, but they don't forget. And neither does the thing in the bone orchard, still hungry, still waiting for someone new to feed.